The receipt shook in her hands before the tears ever did, the thin paper fluttering like it already knew how fragile this moment was, how close everything inside her had come to breaking right there under the fluorescent lights of a small-town pharmacy in Ohio. The numbers at the bottom felt heavier than any weight she had ever carried, heavier than the groceries she put back on shelves last week, heavier than the silence that followed every phone call from the hospital. If this were you, standing there with your chest tight and your breath shallow, would you look away in shame or look up and hope someone noticed? Sarah Mitchell had not planned to cry in public. She never did. Crying was something she rationed, like heat in winter or food at the end of the month. She clutched the small white bag that held the medicine her mother needed to breathe through the night, her fingers pressing into the plastic as if she could somehow squeeze the price down by will alone. The pharmacist waited kindly but firmly, eyes trained on a screen that refused to change its mind. Behind Sarah, the line shifted, people checking watches, sighing softly, living lives that felt impossibly far away from hers. She thought of her mother, Ruth, sitting upright on the couch back home in their narrow duplex, pretending she was fine, pretending she hadn't heard the way Sarah's voice cracked on the phone that morning. Ruth had always been the strong one, the kind of woman who worked double shifts and still packed lunches with little notes tucked inside. Now her lungs betrayed her, and every breath came with a quiet cost that insurance had decided was no longer their problem. If you were Sarah, would you have asked for help, or would pride have kept your mouth shut like it did now? The cashier finally spoke, explaining gently that the total was still the same, that there were no discounts left to apply. Sarah nodded, her head heavy, her wallet already open like a confession. She counted the bills she had brought, knowing before she reached the end that it wouldn't be enough. She felt small, smaller than she had as a child when her shoes wore thin before payday, smaller than when her father left with promises he never kept. The room seemed to close in, shelves blurring into a wash of color as her chest tightened. Somewhere behind her, a man shifted forward, his presence quiet but steady. Michael Turner had come in for allergy medication after work, still wearing his jacket from the construction site, dust clinging to the cuffs. He had been thinking about dinner, about whether his son had finished his homework, about nothing that mattered very much until he saw Sarah's shoulders curl inward, saw the way her hands trembled around that bag. He remembered his own mother at a pharmacy years ago, remembered wishing he were older, wishing he could do something. Sarah started to apologize, her voice barely there, explaining she would have to come back later, maybe tomorrow, maybe when she figured something out. The words felt hollow even as she thought them. Tomorrow did not help lungs that struggled tonight. She turned slightly, already preparing to leave with nothing but the weight of failure pressing into her back. It was then that Michael stepped closer, close enough for her to feel the warmth of another human being who wasn't rushed or annoyed or looking past her. He spoke without ceremony, without hesitation, offering a simple kindness that landed like a lifeline thrown into deep water. There was no judgment in his face, no expectation of gratitude, just a calm certainty that this was something he could do. The pharmacist looked up, surprised but relieved, fingers moving quickly now, the screen finally changing its mind. The total disappeared, replaced by a receipt marked paid in full. Sarah stood frozen, her mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. Her first instinct was to refuse, to insist she couldn't accept something like this from a stranger. But the exhaustion won, the months of holding everything together with sheer willpower finally giving way. Tears spilled freely now, hot and unstoppable, and she pressed a hand to her mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. If this were you, would you let yourself accept help, or would fear of owing something back steal this moment from you? Michael only nodded, a small gesture meant to say this was nothing, even though it wasn't. He thought of the extra hours he had worked last month, of the money that would have gone to something forgettable, and felt an unexpected lightness settle in his chest. Sometimes kindness didn't ask for a reason, only a moment of courage. He stepped back into line, his place reclaimed by someone else, his part already finished. Sarah left the pharmacy clutching the bag like it was something sacred. Outside, the late afternoon sun caught in her tears, turning the world briefly golden. She sat in her car for a long time before turning the key, letting the quiet wrap around her. She thought about how close she had been to breaking, how easily this day could have gone another way. She wondered how many times she had passed someone else's pain without seeing it, without stopping. That night, Ruth breathed easier. Sarah watched her chest rise and fall, steady and calm, and felt a gratitude so deep it almost hurt. She told her mother about the man in line, about the simple way he had changed everything without even knowing it. Ruth closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not just for healing, but for the stranger whose kindness had found them when they needed it most. Weeks passed, and life didn't magically become easier. Bills still came. Work was still uncertain. But something inside Sarah had shifted. She carried that moment with her like a quiet flame, warming her on days when hope felt thin. She began to notice others more, the tired cashier, the neighbor struggling with groceries, the woman at the bus stop staring into space. She couldn't always help, but when she could, she did, remembering how one small act had kept her world from collapsing. Months later, on another ordinary afternoon, Sarah found herself in a different line, this time at a grocery store. Ahead of her, an older man counted change with shaking hands, the total just out of reach. Without thinking too hard, without overanalyzing, she stepped forward. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from recognition. She understood now how moments like this worked, how they asked quietly and waited to see who would answer. Before the story ends, take a moment and tell us in the comments what this moment made you feel, or whether you have ever witnessed or experienced an act of kindness like this yourself. Sarah never saw Michael Turner again, and maybe that was the point. Some people enter our lives only long enough to remind us who we can be, to show us that grace still exists in a world that often feels unforgiving. If this story touched your heart, if it made you reflect on your own choices or believe a little more in second chances, please consider liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing so more stories like this can reach those who might need them most.